so we're going to now talk about how to manage the interview on the day, and some of the things to think about are the practicalities. One of them may be how to get there, and the other one may be what to wear. So Andrea, David, what would you like to share in terms of practicalities?
Well, I think I think it's important to be just focus on the interview itself, so not having to kind of, if you can simplify anything about the day, like having to, how you're going to get there and problems that you might encounter, then it's good to try and simplify that by, if necessary, staying near to where the interview is, or having your route very well planned out. If it's a building that might be quite difficult to find, then maybe doing a kind of dry run earlier, so that you just, you're able to focus on what you need to focus on, which is, what you're bringing to the interview. So I think definitely preparing so you know where you're going, and trying to sort of simplify and manage the journey as much as you can. When the interview I had when I went to the Oxford director interview, I stayed over there the night before, and I got there a little bit early and went and sat in the park opposite and just meditated for a bit before the interview, which was a great way to start.
That's quite helpful, actually. And I agree with you in terms of giving yourself enough time to get to the venue. So for me, I took an hour and a half before my interview time to ensure that my train isn't delayed, to ensure that I get to the venue on time and I'm not nervous or stressed, so I get that time to relax before I go for the interview. Yeah. Cool. And in terms of what to wear now, there's some conversations around what do I wear? Do I go casual? Do I go smart casual, or really formal? And I guess for different genders, it could be different. And I guess one of the things that I am concerned about is like, how would I appear to the interviewers, because I'm visibly Muslim, and is that going to impact the first impression? So what do you guys think about what we should wear for interviews?
I would say that I think wear something that you're comfortable with wearing, and certainly in any kind of situation you don't want to be dressing up to be somebody you're not. So in your case, being Muslim is a key part of who you are, so you wouldn't want to be dressing in a way that was inconsistent with that, and I'm sure no course would want you to do that, because courses are interested in who you are, not trying to be somebody else. So I would say dress that's appropriate for you in the context, and again it's this thing about you and the context, you and the clinical psychology course, and you and a professional work context. So I think you do need to be mindful of that you're in a context where you're going to be meeting psychologists, experts by experience, they're on the panel, and so I think you want to be dressing in a kind of professional, respectful way. So I think there might there are certain things that wouldn't be appropriate to wear in that kind of context. As a general rule for any interviews, I think people say it's safer to err on the side of being more formal than sort of more informal. But I think for men, sometimes people wear suits and ties, but you'll probably find that most of the male interview panel members won't be in a suit and tie. So I don't think you need to feel obliged to wear a suit and tie. And similarly for female interviewees, some people do wear sort of business type suits to the interviews, but you'll probably find that most of the interviewers will be dressed in sort of smart casual type wear, so you don't feel obliged to dress up like that. But if that's how you feel comfortable, then there's certainly nothing wrong with that.
And something that you mentioned, David, just before we recorded was wear something that you would usually wear in a professional context, which I think that's useful to keep in mind.
Yeah, so probably, this is the advice I have had a lot, is like slightly formal, but something you're comfortable in and something you feel is showing who you are. So you don't put on something you'd never wear before, or something you just feel like looks nice because it's a nice outfit for an interview. I think it needs to reflect who you are as well.
I think something that you said earlier that might be quite helpful to mention is that sometimes there's advice to sort of wear something that stands out that will be in the interviewer's mind.
Yeah.
I would say that really is not relevant at all, partly because interview panels will see lots of people, and the only way you'd like to stand out with what you wear is probably not for a good way. And realistically, when the decisions come to be made, it's going to be made on the judgments that people are making in the interview and the other tasks. So the interviewers have got scales and ratings that they're making during that task, and that's what's put together. So people don't, in the decision making part, people are looking at the ratings and the scores that people have made during the panels and comparing candidates on that. They're certainly not sitting there saying, oh, what was the person in the red dress, or that really doesn't come into it at all.
Great. So listening to and answering the question is another point to consider in interviews. Anyone have any ideas, suggestions, advice for our viewers?
I think that comes back to what we were saying earlier about, preparing is, it's really important to have done that reflective stuff and really be clear about what strengths you're bringing to the interview. And then that allows you to sort of free your mind up to when you get into the interview, to be fully present in the interview and to very much listen to what the questions are. And I think this is very much, ties into the clinical skills that are part of clinical psychology, about having done your preparation, thought about what you're doing, but also being there to listen to what the client's saying and to respond to what the client's saying. So you very much want to have done your preparation, but not come in and just sort of shoot that out. You very much want to listen to what the interviewers are saying, partly because that's the way they'll judge how you might be with clients, but also in a particular question is going to be designed to tap into particular ones of those attributes and competencies. And so you want to be responding to that, because if you respond something completely different, they're not going to be able to rate you on the thing that they're trying to rate you on, and then that's not helping them do their job, and it's not helping you communicate your strengths that you're bringing that are relevant to what they're looking for. So it's very, I think, definitely just be present, listen to what the question's about, and I think, as you were saying earlier, you absolutely take a minute to think about what the question is. Ask them to repeat it. If you don't quite catch what they're saying, you're not quite sure about it, absolutely say, could you just repeat that for me? And also, I think it's not at all out of order to just make brief notes. So just, obviously, you're not going to sit there for 10 minutes writing an essay, but you could just make brief notes of a couple of points that you want to say, because again, it's not a memory test, and you'll probably have to leave the notes, or you will have to leave the notes there, but I'm sure no course would think that you have to do everything in your mind, because as psychologists we're often writing things down on paper. That's normally what we do, so you can just write brief notes to help you gather your thoughts.
I think personally that would have been a really helpful advice for me last year, because I really wanted to say, so I suppose my nerves, what happens to me is I have a lot of thoughts, lots I want to say, really struggle to know how to prioritise my answers. So for me it would have been really helpful with that advice to sit and actually just write a few notes down, also because I suppose I would be anxious about forgetting something I wanted to say, just so I can quickly sort of outline an answer, and I think that would have really helped me. So I think that's something I'm going to try to do this year.
Yeah, and that's really helpful actually, and helpful for me, because one of my weaknesses is research. So when a research question comes up, I kind of just splurge. And I guess for answering a question, it's important to take that minute to think about what are the key points that you want to get across to the interview panel. So rehearsing is one, and then taking a breather, which is really important, and just taking that minute to formulate your answers, and then telling the interviewers what your thought process is. And one valuable advice that I got from a trainee is be quite curious with your answers, like I'll be thinking about this, and at the same time I'd be thinking about this. So kind of express what you're thinking is something that they really value, and that's you bringing yourself into the room and kind of sharing your thoughts and your whole self as well.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah.
And just one last thing I'd add to that is that sometimes you kind of get on a roll with an answer and feel like I really know so much about this, and you're going on, and the interviewers may or may not be sort of polite to slow you down. But I think it is worth bearing in mind that there's a limited time allocated for the whole interview. There's a limited time for each question, and I think I take the cues from the interviewers that if they're saying to you that's great, that's probably an indication that you've kind of covered that and they've got as much information as they need for that particular question, and at that point you're probably better putting the brakes on your enthusiasm and waiting and looking for the next question, because once they've got enough information to make that judgment, it's really there's not going to be much benefit in you keep going on, and what you are doing is perhaps taking time away from the next question. So I think just try and sort of keep that in mind, that sometimes less is more, and that once you've got the answer across, you might be better to move on. And again, it's about being in touch with the interviewers, and once they're sort of giving you the signals that you answered, given them enough information, then it's a good thing to move on.
Great. And I think one of the things that would be important is to kind of have some time to just give yourself some pauses. So we're just going to take a pause right now. All right. So one of the questions around how to answer vignettes and research vignettes are quite common. So anyone have any ideas on how do we answer research and clinical vignettes?
I think it's probably important to think that just go back to what the interviews are about. I mean, they are all about trying to look at those kind of competencies that you bring in. They're not a test of knowledge. So these vignettes, be they research or clinical vignettes, are going to be designed to provide material that allow you to kind of demonstrate those competencies. But they're very, I don't think there's going to be a kind of set model answer that they're looking for. It's not like a sort of GCSE question where there's particular kind of words that they're, or concepts that they're going to tick off. They're really just looking as, this is an opportunity for you to be able to demonstrate the competencies. So, if it's a clinical vignette, it's going to be material that will enable you to apply, sort of show that you're able to apply psychological frameworks and ideas that you're familiar with. So, if it's a clinical vignette, you might well use sort of types of approaches that you're familiar with. But, they're not testing your knowledge of those approaches per se, because those are things that you're going to be learning on the course. But it's about your ability to show that you can apply things that you've learned. And in research vignettes, again, it's going to be that you understand the basic principles of research, and you can apply those to either a sort of asking you to design a study or evaluate a study. So, a lot of that, I guess perhaps more with the research vignette, that the preparation is helpful to think about, well, what are the kind of key things that you need to, the sort of methodological considerations in any kind of study. But you definitely do need to kind of adapt it to the material that you get presented with.
I suppose I can only speak from so I go to an AP group every second month, and the questions that tends to come up is around, well, I can start with the clinical vignette, is typical, like which model should we use? Do we use the 5P? Do we use CBT? Do we use systemic? What do we do? How much do we know? So that's really helpful to know that it isn't particularly one model, it's more what you're comfortable talking about. And the other thing is with research, I suppose the anxiety factor for a lot of people is they can think of how to design a study, because you naturally read a lot of studies in your type of job. It's about, what if I say the wrong test, the statistical test, how much does it matter if we know stats that well? How much stats do we need to know? I suppose those are the things that come up in meeting with other assistants as well.
Again, I think it's about the principles. So I don't think any test, any sort of question vignette would be looking for you to say the name of a specific test, but they would be looking for you to understand the basic principles. And I think even if you can, I think it's much more important how you approach the vignette, and so you understand the basic sort of methodology that's being used, or the question that's being asked, so that I think if you can say, well, I'd want to be comparing the results of this with a waiting list control, for example, and then you'd know the kind of comparison that you're doing, and if you can name a particular test that's relevant, that's fine. But I think it's showing your understanding rather than the particular test. And the reality is that when you're doing stats as a trainee, as a clinical psychologist, you don't nobody designs a study and carries that study without ever looking at a textbook, and you have to do it all from memory. So, but you're demonstrating you understand the basics of methodology. So I think if you're you don't want to kind of pretend that you know more than you actually do, and I don't think there's any need to do that, but you do really want to demonstrate that you understand how to design a study, and again it's about really kind of focusing on what's there in front of you rather than trying to kind of bring some particular name from the back of your head. And when you look at the vignette, it is important to take a step back and to say, if it's a study, you might say, well, this is what they've done, but actually you take a step back and you think, well, how could it have been done differently? Would there be anything that you could do differently? And so what's not there? So it just gives you a chance to reflect on what's actually being presented to you.
And I guess the difficulty is making a succinct or, giving a succinct answer about a clinical formulation from a vignette and a research vignette. And I think just whilst you both were speaking, I was thinking about practice. So, recording yourself, explaining your answer for a research vignette, and then kind of the more you practice, the more you realize what are the important elements to add into an interview answer. So, yeah, I think I'll take that on board. And in terms of disclosing and not disclosing personal information, personal experiences of mental health difficulties, what are your thoughts about, explaining that or disclosing that in an interview?
I think the advice I have got for that, because I think there are certain universities that ask more personal questions than others, and what people have said to me is that it's really important to think about that before you enter the interview, as in what you're comfortable sharing, sort of prepare your mindset for what you're willing to share in front of the interviewers. I don't know what you think.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think I'd start by saying that I don't think any course I'm sure no course would want you to feel obliged to share personal kind of aspects of your background or, on particularly past history or current history of physical or mental health problems, that you shouldn't feel obliged to disclose things that you're not comfortable with disclosing. I think you might well do that, and people will be encouraging and supportive if you do disclose things, because that's part of how you are. So you might who you are. So it may well help to explain experiences that you've had and how you've managed particular situations in the past. But I don't think that you should feel kind of obliged, and definitely it's helpful to have thought through it beforehand and think about what you feel comfortable with sharing.
Yeah, and I think just to reiterate, being comfortable with sharing personal information. I know from my interview last year I spoke about a personal experience, and that had influenced how I viewed my practice as an AP. And yeah, that was something that I wanted to share, and it made me share something that was unique and individual, and I thought that might be good to share as well. So yeah, it's all dependent on what you're comfortable with, and it's your choice at the end of the day. And I guess for me, the reason why I disclosed it is because I wanted to share something unique about me and something that I can possibly influence in the field. So yeah, I
think it's also important to just keep in mind again the sort of things that clinical psychology interviews are looking for. So the competencies and the sort of values aspect as well. And if you are talking about personal experience, it may well be that that's demonstrated some of those. And so it may well demonstrate something about how you manage self-care, which is something that they'll be interested in. It might well demonstrate something about your own values, which is something that's going to be relevant to the clinical. So it's not just saying it for its own sake, although they are interested in you, but also, again, think about what they're doing, which is about trying to match what you're bringing with what has been identified as being kind of key characteristics of what's helpful in terms of clinical psychology practice.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And we just want to touch on interview nerves. We did this earlier on, so let's take 3 pointers that we can give the viewers on how to manage interview nerves. Should we start off with you, Andrea?
Well, I haven't yet had a successful interview, but how I manage my nerves, I think I do a positive self-talk before I go in. This might sound a bit stupid, but one of my friends advised me to raise my hands up because you can feel really like tight in your chest, to like do a stretch before you go into the interview room. Remind yourself of your strengths, and that really helped me at least preparing, so I didn't feel so stressed or overwhelmed about the context and everything like that. But yeah, more practical things, I don't know, do you have any advice?
I mean, there's some helpful advice in a book that I often recommend to people called The Interview Expert, and that has advice about specific physical symptoms that you might have of anxiety, like dry mouth and shaky hands and that sort of thing. So one of the things that people say about dry mouth is that actually drinking water doesn't really help with the dry mouth, so that maybe sucking a sweet immediately beforehand or having a sweet drink might help with that. So I think again it's probably something that you can try out and see if you find things that help with dry mouth, because again, you know, it's just one less thing you want to be distracted. You don't want to be distracted by trying to sort of manage symptoms, anxiety symptoms. So if you can find ways that are helpful to manage those in advance, then that'll help free up your headspace to focus on what the actual question is.
Yeah, and for me, I would say taking a deep breath before each question and actually giving yourself a minute to think. And that minute is going to be the longest minute ever, but that's really helpful for you to kind of process your thoughts, process the answer, and process the question. So these are our 3 pointers, and yeah.
Great.
Cool. So another question that we were wondering that you might be thinking about are questions to ask to the panel. Do we ask questions? Shouldn't we ask questions? What are your thoughts?
I do think that's something that comes up a lot between like APs, and I think that's a myth that is definitely out there, that people tell you need to prepare a question, it needs to be a really good question, but I don't know if that's actually helpful, or what do you think?
I think it's definitely not something you should feel under any obligation to do at all. Again, thinking about what's happening, that you're being assessed on these different competencies, and certainly, a question you ask is not going to count against that. So you're not going to be assessed on the question you ask at all. So that's not to say you shouldn't ask a question. I mean, if there is something that's particularly on your mind, then it's an opportunity to ask it. Although bear in mind, there's not going to, there probably will be other opportunities to ask questions. So I think if there's something that specifically that you want to ask, then do feel free to ask it. But you definitely shouldn't feel under any obligation, and it certainly won't reflect badly on you at all if you don't ask any questions.
And so I'm guessing there are more things that we need to consider when in the interview. Have you got any thoughts about what else we can consider whilst we are talking about interviews?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about the content and making sure that you provide information about your experience and your reflection that's relevant to the competencies and evidence. It's important to kind of not just say, oh, I've got this competency, but provide evidence of it. But sometimes you might get too focused on that. It's also important to have that balance between that and also the making the interpersonal aspect of the interview, because as we mentioned earlier, people are going to be thinking about different sort of aspects. They're going to be thinking about your academic and clinical skills, but also about your interpersonal skills, and that is being assessed through the interview and how you interact with the panel. So I think it is also important just to think about, how am I interacting with the people in the panel? Again, we talked about the importance of listening, so the fact that you're listening to them is an important thing, but also just checking that you're making eye contact with them and that you're maintaining a rapport with them, I think is an important thing, because otherwise it may be that if you're just so focused and just maybe just looking at one person, or just thinking, just sort of so focused on what you've got to say, that might kind of make people think, well, how's this person going to be with clients?
Yeah, I think that's like a reflection I've taken a lot from our discussion today as well, that maybe thinking more of the interviews as potential clients in the future, and think about how you would be around clients, and that I think that at least would help put me at ease. Yeah, and I suppose reframe it and put me in different types of contexts. Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
That is very, very helpful. And you know, some of the advice that my former supervisors have given me is, you know, think about the report that you have with the interviewers. That's what they're going to look for in terms of indicating how you get along with clients. So yeah, the rapport, the relationship you have with the interviewer is really good. Smile, have good eye contact, and be quite engaging, and that's something that is really important, I guess.
Yeah, I think as you say, Victor, engaging. I think Andrea said about imagining how you'd be with service users. I think that's a really helpful piece of advice. And you know, I think, again, to quote one of the things I often say to people before interviews, it's, you know, be yourself, because everyone else has taken. You know, the only person you can be genuinely, authentically, is yourself in there. And you know, I'm sure, you know, if you've got to this point in your career, how you are with people is engaging and empathic, and you know, able to listen and respond. So you know, you want to make sure that you're reflecting that in the interview, and not kind of trying to sort of. But I think just make sure that you sort of think about that and not get too sort of focused on one aspect of it, like trying to remember particular bits of information. If that makes sense.
And yeah, that definitely makes sense. And whilst you were mentioning, you know, don't get really caught up in the content and the knowledge, you might also get caught up with how you come across, and that could be another stressful factor. So, you know, ensuring to remember to breathe, and you know, relax your shoulders and think about your strengths, and you know, you deserve to be here. And again, following on what David said about the confidence, you know, you deserve to be here. You have something to offer to the clinical psychology field, and present it in a way that shows you as a person, you know, you are unique, and you know, no one else is going to be the same as you. So bring that forward. Yeah.
Great.
So in terms of after the interview and accepting offers and deciding whether to attend further interviews, what are your thoughts about those two aspects?
Well, I think you should be definitely prepared. You know, it's quite common if people get interviews. Well, it's common not to get interviews often. The first time you apply, you might get interviews another time and maybe not get any offers. But if you've got more than one interview, then it's not at all uncommon to get more than one offer. And it's definitely important to be thinking about having to make that decision, because you know, courses are not the same. And obviously they have basic sort of common components, but they differ in lots of different ways, where they are in the country, where the placements are, you know, how it relates to the university, the sort of strengths of that course in terms of particular interests or research things, the size of the cohort varies quite a lot. So it's definitely worth sort of thinking those things through, and thinking, you know, which things match with you, what your, you know, what's the best match for you as an individual, and that's going to be different for different people, obviously. And then I would say, if you do have two interviews, and the first one you get an offer, if you know for sure that that's the one was your first choice, and you know you that's the one that you will go to, then really there's no point in going to the next one, just for the sake of it. And if you are sure that that first course was the one that you would want to go to, then I think you're much better off just accepting that offer and then letting someone else go to the other interview. Obviously, you know, you might well still be in two minds, and you might well want to go and, you know, go along to the course, and that's obviously fine.
I think that's quite helpful. Yeah. And in regards to coping with not receiving an offer, you know, you might have some thoughts about whether you want to reapply next year. What do you do next? What's the next steps? I guess for me, when I was on reserve and then wasn't offered a place, for a course, it was quite difficult for me to swallow because I felt like I didn't achieve what I wanted to achieve. And therefore I was thinking about the next steps in terms of how to get into the next year. And I guess that involved, thinking about more experience, more interview practice, taking the feedback that I received from the interview panel about what I can do to improve. Then this year I've taken that on board. So I decided to reapply. However, there are some individuals who have applied for a number of years, and that might be quite difficult in terms of questioning whether if this is the route that you want to actually pursue or not. And I guess for me personally, I have put myself, gave myself a time limit where, after like 4 years, for me, I'm going to be thinking about what other alternative routes are there that I can take. And even though I'll be taking an alternative route, I could possibly come back into clinical psychology and apply again, and with more experience, not just clinical and research, but life experience, and that might benefit the process in either getting in or not. So that's my perspective. Anyone else have any thoughts?
I would say the first thing, I mean, as you say, it is a big thing because you've invested so much in to this process. So I think that it's important to accept that it's going to be an upsetting time, and you may well. I think it's almost certainly good advice to take a step back and just take a bit of a break from it all before you make any decisions, really. What I would say is I think all courses will give you feedback from your interviews, so I think it's definitely worth taking that up and listening carefully to the feedback that they give you. I think if you've had an interview, then that indicates that you've got the basic sort of requirements to get on to be accepted for training. So I think listen to what the feedback is, and if they say there's some particular that you weren't able to sort of communicate things clearly in the interview, or or maybe that you didn't reflect sufficiently on the work you'd done, then it's definitely worth taking that advice on and trying to work on that for another year.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like really good advice is sort of to step back a bit, reflect on what could I have gone better, but also that you've done really well getting that far, I suppose. And maybe just check in with yourself, is the right step now to prepare for next year again? What do I do to improve my interview next year, or should I seek a different path? I think is that constant checking in with yourself, whether this is something you're still willing to continue, because it is a quite stressful period, and sort of finding that balance, I think, sounds important.
Yeah, and I guess thinking it of as a journey. A lot of people who apply for this role focus solely on this clinical process, and other parts of their life are quite interrupted. So seeing that this is a journey, try to take care of yourself. And most trainees that I've spoken to, they mentioned that the year that they got on was the year that they were taking care of themselves the most, and they didn't put so much pressure and stress on themselves to get on. So yeah, taking care of yourself is really important, and as a clinical psychologist, it's always emphasized taking care of yourself. When we work with service users, it's always about taking care of yourself, so it's about implementing that, and that comes across in interviews. When you do take care of yourself, you're more likely to be relaxed when you answer the questions. You're more likely to talk about personal experiences with ease, and yeah, that's something that I would kind of take on board.
That's good advice.
Yeah. So we're going to spend the last minute just sharing our thank you for watching the video.
Yeah.
Is that right? So thank you for watching the video. We hope that it's been really helpful and beneficial, and if there are questions that you would like answered, maybe we could do something different next time and answer those questions.
Yeah. I think maybe there might be opportunities to put comments on the video if it's online. And yeah, I think we would hope that it helps you to have a successful interview, which means being able to communicate your strengths and experience in the best way possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good luck.